Hello, it's the Great Canadian Bagel here, coming to you with another update to the U.S. 2022 midterm congressional House Representatives election forecast. So, just right off the bat, let's see what is done. So, generally speaking, the four subregions, broadly the South, the Midwest, the West, the Northeast over here. These four subregions have actually gotten more extreme. So the South has gotten a lot redder. Places like Oklahoma, Louisiana, Kentucky, West Virginia are now in the 70% plus column. Places like Minnesota, and Illinois have changed. Illinois went to a lower column, and Minnesota went to a higher column for vote share. In the West, you don't really see it because a lot of these are quite close, but Oregon flipped, so now it is leaning Democrat. It's actually Democrats are forecast to get a slight majority of the vote there. Washington, they gained a few a few decimal places, not a lot, but some. They gained some ground in California. Again, not enough to change the color, but it's worth noting. And they gained some ground in Nevada and New Mexico and Colorado. In the Northeast, similar story. The Republicans lost a bit of ground in New Hampshire, popular vote share-wise, though the rest of New England is roughly the same. Northeast is roughly the same, because technically these three states are not part of New England normally. Normally it is just these six. So, we've seen a lot of changes, and there's some seat changes going on. This will be the easiest way to show it. So, I will note here with these stars, the previous updates, June 26th and July 3rd, the maps, barring some typos, were correct. I have written down the wrong number of seats here. Long story short, my algorithm forecasts without the reapportionment and with the reapportionment, and I wrote down the wrong numbers on these ones, and I no longer have the old ones. Up here is with the reapportionment. The maps are with the reapportionment, so these ones are slightly off, not meaningfully. The seat totals are the same, but the District 1 are not the same. That makes sense? Like, we're only talking like 1 or 2 seats different. So, not a big deal. Technically, some states will have more seats, but again, not a big deal. I apologize, but as always, I will let you guys know whenever I make a mistake, because that is useful to know. So, again, we can see here, West Coast, it's not a lot, but it is subtle, and I think it is meaningful. Republicans have lost 0.2, Democrats up 0.1. Again, doesn't sound like a lot, but I think it is meaningful. The South, Democrats down 1.3, Republicans up 1.3. The Midwest, similar story. And in the Northeast, technically, yes, the Republicans gained some ground relative to the Democrats, but not in a useful way. And it's mostly in Pennsylvania, where the Republicans are doing better, and a little tiny bit in Maine? Don't remember. But again, not hugely important to the result of the election, because the states where the Republicans gained some ground in the Northeast are in states that have very polarized districts, so the odds of flipping another seat are really low. Like, the odds of Republicans picking up a seat in Philadelphia, it's not impossible, but very unlikely. So, I have also introduced another metric here, because people have commented on my previous videos, and I love this. By all means, don't take this as the wrong way, that talking about PVI numbers and be like, this seat in this district is this level, and it seems strange. So, what I've done, this is the first draft. I reserve all rights to change this going forward, but my first draft of this is a naive forecast. This is, again, not a slight to people coming at this. This is to make my model better and make it useful for you guys. So, if you don't think this is useful, let me know in the comments, and I will stop doing this, because it takes me more time. So, if you don't like, if it's not helpful to you, whatever. So the way this is calculated is it's basically looking at these votes by regions, and it's doing a relative simple calculation. It's taking the national average lead, and it's adding it to the regional lead and dividing by 2. So it's an average between the regional and the national, and then you apply that number naively by just adding that straight to the PVI score, and if it's still leaning Dem, it's Dem. If it's still leaning Republican, it's Republican. So we're ignoring incumbents, we're ignoring demographics completely, like race, age, sex, education, attainment, income. All of those things are being ignored, and you're just naively looking if all voters were homogenous in the same person, and the only thing different is different districts at different partisan tilts, this would be the result you would see with these regional numbers and this national number. Again, this is again calculated by taking the PVIs of the Northeast and adding the average of the regional lead and the national lead. In fact, I will pop over to this tab. This is where I'm calculating this. So here we have the regional lead, which is 11.4 for Democrats. Ignore the minus plus signs. They don't mean anything. It's just math related. I had to pick one. It's convention, whatever. And then this is for national. So here we have added the regional to the national divided by 2, average. Then add that into here. No, we add that here, and then we get the current leaning of the district, and then we find out, is it Democrat or Republican? Again, ignore them plus minus. It's just, that's how you distinguish 2 numbers. You pick a convention. It doesn't matter. It's irrelevant. So that's the wrong one. So that's where we are. And just raw numbers, raw whatever. And now, why? If you don't want the why, you can leave now. You've gotten the facts. So why is this happening? What's going on? So, the big news here, minus the overall part in the Northeast becoming slightly more Republican, I think that might just be a particular fluke. I think it's going to go back to more Democrat, but we'll see. Again, barring that general trend, the specific trend is most of the blue states have gotten bluer, and most of the red states have gotten redder, and most of the purple states have gotten redder. So the purple and red states are getting redder, and the blue states are getting bluer right now for the midterms. Long term, who knows? But for this midterm, that's what's happening. So why is it happening? Well, there's a couple reasons. It seems a lot of it seems to be coming out of the fallout of Roe still. Again, I've said this before, I'll say it again. I don't think Roe is actually meaningfully affecting headline numbers. I don't think it's going to make a meaningful difference in if Republicans win a district or the Democrats win a district, because it's basically further entrenching. Oh, that's not useful background. Here we go. It's further entrenching partisan tilts on that issue. So it's very hard to be a quote-unquote moderate on abortion, though that said, most of the moderates on abortion seem to be in the Republican camp in that regard. I'm defining moderate on abortion issue as someone who supports some restrictions, but not all. I can't think of any other way to be moderate on abortion. So, for example, Glenn Youngkin would be a potential example of a more moderate on abortion. I think his state, Virginia, as governor, he's trying to pursue a ban at 15 weeks, which, yes, would have not been allowed before Roe was overturned. In nominal, I mean, that's why Roe was overturned. Mississippi passed a ban that did exactly that. And actually, I think Mississippi is the wrong color. I think it's supposed to be the same as Arkansas and Alabama. I'm not fixing the map live. It's too annoying. Where is it? So that's not super moderate previously, but it is relatively moderate now, considering the positions of places like Oklahoma and Texas, and I believe Idaho, and there's a couple other states where it's just straight up illegal now. And it's also moderate compared to states like Colorado, where there's no restrictions, as far as I'm aware. So that seems to be the moderate position, and it seems, as far as I can tell, only Republicans are holding the moderate position on abortion. Which I think is why, contrary to a lot of people, not that I think this is meaningfully impactful at all, but the reason why I don't think it's meaningfully impactful is this. Now, the Democrats could totally move to a more moderate abortion position or more receptive of it, but they seem to be doing the opposite. At least a lot of the activists really seem to be pushing to all or nothing position, like any restriction is bad. And in the long term, I see that actually possibly hurting them. Because, again, you look at some of the data coming out. There's a YouGov poll the other day. YouGov is not a pollster. I would say favors Republicans. I say probably a middle of the road pollster in partisan tilt. I think they're slightly favorable to the Democrats, but not meaningfully. I reserve the right to change that opinion later, but they seem to be moderately tilted to Democrats. Not a meaningful amount, though. They've been polling roughly weekly, and one of their questions I ask is your thoughts on if or when abortion should be restricted. They're now asking for broad camps. They had more detailed earlier, but now they really reduced it to 4. Always illegal. No conditions. Illegal with conditions, typically life of mother, and I think rape were the two that were listed in the question specifically. But it's more or less elective abortions banned. I think that's the best way to describe that position. No elective abortion. Then you should be allowed to elective abortion, but not to a date. But there should be restrictions at a certain date. Typically, that means somewhere between heartbeat. There should be a limit, but it should be somewhere between heartbeat and viability. It's a very varied position. Before they broke it out into 6 weeks, 12 weeks, 15 weeks, 24 weeks. Now they've just mushed those together. And the final camp is there should be no restrictions. In this most recent poll, and again, one poll, so take some salt into it, but the most recent poll, 44% of Americans who had an opinion, I think there was a couple of percentage points. No, I think there was no undecideds actually, but I'm not 100% certain. I don't have the poll in front of me right now. 44% said either total ban or a ban with exceptions. And I'm grouping those together specifically. For context, it's 30-12, so 12% want total, 30% want ban with exceptions. I'm grouping it together because I think the people who want total ban won't care if there's restrictions as long as the restrictions are rigorously held. And that is those voters, like, the restrictions aren't in name only, because there are places, I believe Finland, where it's technically illegal to get an abortion, or is it Germany? I think it's Germany, where it's technically illegal to get an abortion in almost all cases, but generally speaking, you can find a doctor who will agree to it. So, like, it's technically illegal, and there's technically no exceptions, other than, like, life and stuff like that. But in practice, you can get it. As long as that's not the case, I think the total and the with exceptions are basically the same group. So that's 44%, which is slightly higher than it was previously. Roughly 30% want none, which is about the same as it has been. And there's 26% who want some, which is slightly smaller. Again, not meaningfully. It could be very much the case that a particular poll sample has changed the number a little bit. But over time, these are roughly the same group, so we can abstract this one layer and go, it's roughly 10% of people want it totally banned, 30% want it banned with a few exceptions, 30% typically want it banned after a certain point, or I guess legal up to a certain point, I guess is a certain better way to phrase it, typically somewhere between 6 and 24 weeks. And the final group wants no restrictions. Those are the groups. And of those groups, I don't see any prominent Democrats, either governors or Congress people or senators, advocating for anything but the most extreme position. Now, they might exist. I'm not saying there's no Democrats who are fine with a limit at 24 weeks or a limit at 12 weeks or 15 weeks or whatever. I'm not saying they don't exist. I'm saying they're not loud and they're not getting media attention. They're not in the conversation, generally speaking. The ones in the conversation, the ones getting airtime, the ones people can see and hear, are all from totally unrestricted camp. And since they're all from that camp, it actually kind of puts it into a position that the other 70% of Americans who do not like that position are actually opposed to them. So, in a lot of ways, this is not a winning issue for the Democrats. It could theoretically be if they did some maneuvering and positioning. But at the end of the day, the way I see it really breaking down is the best case scenario is you can split the moderate group who want some restrictions but not all of the restrictions. And then you're going to have roughly 40% of people who probably all vote Republican anyways, who want it totally banned the total ban on an elective at minimum. And 30% of people who probably vote Democrat anyways, who want totally unrestricted. So I don't see this being a major political issue unless the Democrats alienate the middle-of-the-road voters. Because I don't see the middle-of-the-road voters being alienated by what Texas is doing. At least not any more than they get alienated by what Colorado did, or what Maryland did, or what California did. The middle-of-the-road voters, like in a state like New Hampshire, where it's 24 weeks as the limit, I don't think the middle-of-the-road voters who like 24 weeks as the limit are going to be fussed because what Texas, Idaho, Mississippi, Oklahoma are doing any more than what Colorado, California, and Maryland did. They're not going to be fussed. I don't think it's going to matter to them. Yes, I'm sure there's voters in Texas who want it legal up to 24 weeks who are really upset that it's banned. Okay. I'm sure there's voters in Colorado who think an abortion after 24 weeks is horrific, or whatever your cutoff is. Like, it's fine up to this point, but after that point, no, you can't do it. And they're on the other side. Is it enough to make them vote Republican, or in the case of Texas, vote Democrat? I don't know. That depends on the person. But the core point here is, in a place like Texas, clearly the majority of people support the ban, at least state-wise, because no one's repealed it. Same thing with Mississippi. Same thing with Oklahoma. Same thing with Idaho. These states, the majority of people support the ban because there's no political movement of meaningful force that has any likelihood of winning to undo the ban. Maybe in the future that could happen, but in the foreseeable present, it doesn't seem likely. Same thing with Colorado and California and Maryland. There doesn't seem to be a movement that seems likely to win on a state level that wants to undo the current law on it. It might exist, there might be members fighting for it, but it doesn't seem likely or present that it could win. In the near future, at least. Politics is complicated, and anything can happen given a long enough time horizon. With some caveats, but I'm not going to go into because it's too outside of the scope of this video. So, the core issue here is you have some states, again, Texas, Oklahoma, to be two, that are on one side, and some like Colorado and California on the other side. And then you'll have a bunch of ones in the middle, like Virginia and New Hampshire and some of the Midwest states and some of the other southern states, like over here in Florida. I think Florida's at 15 weeks. Where I don't think it's going to be a relevant issue. Because as long, like federally, as long as the Republicans aren't campaigning on a total ban, which as far as I can tell, they're not. Some do want it, but a lot don't. Just as nationally, some Democrats want a totally unrestricted, no limits, all the way up to birth, and some don't. It's like there's moderates in both parties. Not many anymore, but they exist still. So as long as the Republicans aren't pushing it nationally, I don't think it's going to be relevant. And the way it seems to be trending, I think it's actually going in Republicans' favor if they eventually do want to try to endorse a federal ban, though you do have some questions there. I'm not 100% sure if it's federal jurisdiction in the U.S., but when has that ever stopped the U.S. federal government? Okay, so that's one of the issues. The other really big issue, and this is the one really hurting the Democrats, the abortion stuff is side note. It's taking all the airtime these days, and I spent most of my video talking about it. But it's a side issue, really. The main issue that's sinking the Democrats right now is the economy. Record high inflation, rapidly rising interest rates, which hurts the average person, as does inflation. In the long term, the higher interest rates are better for the average person than the higher inflation. But in the short term, you feel both, and it sucks. So both getting hurt out of both ends there. And there's unpopular spending federally with the support for Ukraine is getting really unpopular in the U.S. Very divisive, too, on political lines, actually. Or, sorry, not on political lines. It's complicated. But anyways, it's getting very unpopular. It was popular. Now it's like kind of like in the middle of the road, and it's trending down to even more unpopular. And the more you talk about levels of support, the more unpopular it actually gets. So, and in general, it seems a lot of people blame the Biden administration and by proxy the Democrat-controlled Congress and Senate for a lot of the problems. A lot of them. And it's pretty safe to say why, because a lot of the bills they passed, a lot of economists, Democrat too, said, yes, this spending package will put inflationary pressure. Because of course it does. You don't have to be an economist. It's pretty low, it's like second year economics level stuff. The government borrowing money and spending it on entitlement programs or transfer payments, which is what most of the money is being spent on. Though a lot of it is also on like random construction projects, which is also a problem too in this regard. Borrowing money and then doing that bids up the price of goods. For example, transfer payments add liquidity to the people receiving them. With increased liquidity, those people will buy more things. And since they're buying more things, there's more demand for things. And if there's more demand for things, the prices go up. It's a different kind of inflation, but it's still an inflationary pressure. Now, to be really clear, inflation is just the increase in the supply of monetary supply, like true proper inflation. But things that look like inflation are things that are inflationary pressures, again, like these transfer payments. I don't believe there's any federal carbon taxes, but a carbon tax is an example. A sales tax is another example. Things that push up the price of goods that are not technically printing money or related to printing money. So you have this. And this is the really biggest issue because this is really hurting the average person, and it looks entirely the fault of the Democrats. They 2019, before, or well, even February 2020, before the COVID lockdowns, not COVID, the COVID lockdowns, the U.S. economy was doing fantastic. It's the strongest it was been in decades. It was booming. Unemployment rate was really low. Wage growth was going up quite rapidly, and it was actually going up highest among the poorest populations. It was raising the fastest percentage-wise among the poorest people. The lowest income earners, I guess is a better way to say that. So, all good things. Cue the COVID lockdowns, economic devastation wrought through them. Trump, who's president at the time, doesn't take much blame because people understand that the lockdowns were done for maybe a noble reason, though they caused a huge amount of devastation. Biden and the Democrats, though, who come in 2020, well, the economy's doing a good rebound. It's not a perfect rebound, but it's a good rebound in the late 2020 as the lockdowns are being eased up and stuff. They come in, they inherit a rebounding economy that was just a year ago, in the last February, one of the strongest economies the U.S. has had in ages. And in the span of 18 months, more or less, the economy went from recovering just fine to being in disaster. The highest inflation in 40 years, interest rates going up extremely rapidly, and it's hard to say where the height's going to be, which is putting a huge credit crunch, which is putting a huge pressure on GDP growth. Last quarter had negative GDP growth. It's very likely this next quarter is going to have negative GDP growth, though not guaranteed, but it's likely. And if not next quarter, most people expect a recession by at least 2023. And depending on if the central banks have successfully stamped out inflation before it becomes endemic, they might be fine. It might cool off by 24, and it's not going to be dead weight over Biden or whoever replaces him as presidential candidate, because I know there's some discussion if he should even be the Democrat nominee in 2024. I do not pretend to speculate on who's going to be, but there is discussion on that. But that is not going to come into place in 2022 by November, and it is very possible by 2024, if the central banks waited too long, which some people think they did, we might be seeing endemic inflation and start seeing stagflation like they did in the 70s. It's not guaranteed. I'm not saying it will happen, but it's a possibility. And it would be a very bad possibility. It would be, as they say, a bad outcome. So that is going to make it very difficult for a lot of Democrats in marginal seats. Generally speaking, I'm going to say marginal seat is somewhere between R+5 and D+5 if you use the Cook PVI ratings. Again, you can win in a more partisan seat. It's not the first time it's happened. It won't be the last time. For example, Doug Jones won Senate, a Democratic senator, won in Alabama at one point because his opponent was extremely corrupt and terrible. I believe it was corruption. Anyways, so it does happen. Joe Manchin wins in West Virginia as a Senate, one of the most pro-Trump states in America. Now, a lot of people don't like Joe Manchin in the Democratic Party because he's very moderate, but I mean, he's from West Virginia, which is a very right-wing state at this point. So, beggars can't be choosers. So, this is going to make it very difficult for these people, these ones in marginal ridings, to sell the pitch that they should be given a chance to try to correct where the economy is right now, or that Biden's agenda should keep going forward because it seems so far that his presidency is a disaster. Everything he's doing seems to be making it worse, or at least not making it better. So we got a kind of a dichotomy there. It's either, and both are bad. Either he's not making it better, or he's making it worse. Both are really bad. You don't want either of those. So it's going to be very hard sell to the average Joe Blow that Biden's agenda should go forward unopposed. In fact, I think it might be an impossible ticket to sell. And that's why it's looking like the Republicans are going to go up to about 250 seats. Some people have commented before that would be a very shocking win, pointing back to things like 2014 and 2010 and other midterm elections like this. But this is different than those. 2010, which was not even close to this. I think the Republicans did take the House, though. Don't quote me on that. I have not memorized every single election that has ever happened in the U.S. But in 2010, by the time that midterm happened, the biggest hits of the Great Recession had cooled off. 2009 was where the recession was. And by 2010, the economy was getting back together. Now, people can complain that maybe Obama's policies weren't the most efficient, or they could have done this or that, blah, 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 blah. But when you're at the end of the day, when you as a politician are arguing with someone that the other guy's not being efficient, or he could have been more efficient, or you're going to lose a lot of interest. Efficiency arguments don't sell to people. People don't care. Because people don't care, not because they're uninterested idiots or they're morons or whatever. They don't care because you can't prove that. You can't tell them that we would have done it better. The counterfactual doesn't exist. You weren't in office. You can't say you would have done better. You could be like, I think I would have done better. Well, you can't prove it to me. You weren't in office. So that kind of argument doesn't really make sense to people. But in this case, what's different here to 2010 or 2014, frankly, I'm actually not really 100% sure why the Republicans destroyed in 2014. I know it was related to the Tea Party wave, but I don't know what the specific causes are because I haven't looked into it recently. But comment below, actually, if you know the specific reason there, because that would be interesting to see without having to, well, or might at least help me dive into looking at that because I'm actually curious now. But the big thing is, unlike those elections, the economic problems are right now. People are voting, well, there's the economic issues. Well, everything's in disaster. Well, everything's going to hell in a handbasket. Inflation's skyrocketing, what's like 9.1% in the US this month. Etc., etc. It's right now. If it fixes or cools off by November, maybe you'll see this lead narrow. But, big but, if this doesn't cool off, or it stays roughly the same, at least the same magnitude, and cooling off for the record, would be like pulling it down from 9.1 to 4 or something like that. If it's still in the high single digits, if not double digits, I think there's only can be a route. Because the Democrats, with a trifecta, a weak trifecta, but a trifecta, nonetheless, couldn't manage the country. You can argue, perhaps, that Biden and the Democrats, they're just victims of circumstance and it's not their fault. You could argue that. Voters don't care. Voters see you were in office, everything went to shit, you're responsible. Because at the very least, you do not seem to have tried to fix it. And then you get damning sentences that came from the Biden administration that make it worse. When gas prices started getting unaffordable for people, and you have Pete Buttigieg's of the world telling you, just get a Tesla. What a slap in the face. What person who can barely afford gas has $80,000 to buy a Tesla? What? And a lot of people who are really suffering on gas are people where electric cars with their current technology level are worthless. Electric cars are great for city commuters. If you are hauling heavy equipment around because you're a tradesperson, or you have to travel long distances in the countryside to your work site, for example, if you're going to like an oil platform, your electric car's not going to be a good choice for you. And if you're in the city, there's other options, like a bus, which you're probably already doing if the gas prices are unaffordable for you, and you're probably miserable for it. But you probably can't afford to buy a brand new electric car, or else why would you be complaining? If you have $80,000 burning a hole in your pocket, or you have the financial wiggle room to afford the monthly payments on $80,000 car, plus taxes, plus fees, plus all that other nonsense dealership slap you with, plus interest, well, you're not struggling to pay for gas. So what are we talking about? What's going on? Like, it's these issues that are sinking them. And it's pretty safe. Like, maybe we can... My model might be aggressive for the Republicans, or might be soft on the Democrats. Maybe. Maybe I'm underestimating the power of incumbency in the U.S. Because I have an incumbency bias, but it's calibrated more for Canada. Maybe in the U.S. it's more. Okay, that's a possibility. Maybe the polls are wrong. Oh, that's always possible. I mean, the polls in the U.S. suck. But I was really close in 2020. I was the closest for the popular vote. And we look at this popular vote here, well, we're looking at +7 Republican. And the PVI numbers suggest that threshold, it should be a bigger blow up than what I have. I don't think there's anything wrong with this forecast here. Again, maybe the numbers are wrong, but I'm not so certain. I suspect this will be a historic route. And quibbling issues on social things aren't going to matter this election. 2024? Maybe. But even the most paranoid moderate on abortion, the 24-weeker who just can't stand the possibility you'll be banned, they have nothing to worry about. What are the odds the Republicans are going to get a veto-proof majority? I believe it's 2/3, so they're not even close to that at this point. So even in a scenario, which some people, some commenters, have suggested might be extreme, by all means, keep talking about that. I'm not dissing you. I like the critique and the feedback. I'm just saying, I think I support my model. At least until I'm wrong, in which case I will tell you what I'm wrong and what I learned from this. And like I've always done, I did it in France, I did it in Ontario. I'll always admit when I'm wrong. And I'll always shout when I'm right. Because no one else will, because I'm too small. But the core thing, and the why these social issues aren't going to matter, Republicans aren't going to get a veto-proof majority. And the Democrats control the presidency. So any major social change, Medicare, guns, abortion, whatever, it's going to get vetoed by Biden. Flip the tongue there. 2024, that might come into issue. But if I'm a Democrat, I'm going to be worried. And you better start making good arguments. Because 44%. That's what the most recent YouGov poll said. 44% support total ban elective abortion. If that number goes up, well, you're screwed. And even at 44%, unless you're telling me that every single abortion moderate in the U.S. is extremely passionate and really cares about their issue, I'll be surprised, because most people don't. You look at an issue, 20% of people really care about it. 80% might have an opinion on it, but it's not the biggest deal in the world. They're not, like, gonna die over it. Or die on the hill on it. They'll vote for other reasons. So be careful. Democrats, you're going into a very bad circumstance. And you might be screwed. 2022. 2024? We'll see. With that said, I hope you liked the video, and if you did, smash that like button, press subscribe, because all these numbers really help me. You would be surprised how many more views a video gets when you subscribe to it. It really does help. And it sends a signal that I'm doing the right thing and that you like this kind of content. And you like my commentary. Though if you hate my commentary, by all means, I do everything in my power to front load the video with just the facts, and then you can just ignore the rest of the video. So if you watch this long, and you hate my commentary, first off, I'm a bit surprised. Comment below, that is a single person. But by all means, stop watching after the facts. And if you think I'm getting in a commentary before going through all the facts, comment, let me know. I lead with the map and the thumbnail and stuff because I don't care to clickbait people. I don't care how long you watch the video. If you want to watch the whole video, fantastic. If you don't, I don't care. Some people like this. I make that for the people who like it. If you don't like it, that's fine. And as always, if you want to follow me and do stuff or see sneak peeks on maps, because I'm going to start doing that, follow me on Twitter at BagelPolling, and, well, I will see you next time. Adios.